World War II was recorded as one of the bloodiest and most destructive wars in history. Millions of people lost their lives. Cities were reduced to rubble, empires collapsed, some borders were redrawn. However, the war was not experienced only on the front lines. The war was not won only on plains where tanks advanced, in cities where bombs fell, or on maps. Some wars were dark, some were silent, and some were carried out far from human sight, meters beneath the ground. In this invisible war, it was not weapons that spoke, but wealth. Not bullets, but gold bars changed hands. And victories were measured not by flags, but by vaults. Throughout World War II, the occupied countries were not defeated only militarily. Their economies were also systematically drained. Banks were closed, central vaults were opened, temples, museums, and private collections were looted. Gold, silver, jewels, and priceless artifacts were seen not merely as spoils of war, but as strategic tools that would determine the future of the war. Because toward the end of the war, everyone was asking the same question: when the war ends, who will remain standing? For this reason, some powers planned even for defeat. And at the center of this plan, there was only one thing: gold. Gold was not just a measure of value. Gold was the key to rebirth. It was the guarantee of rearmament, regaining power, and ruling again. That is why, even while the war continued, some treasures were hidden for the future. But they were hidden in such a way that even finding them would require a price. This story is not about a lost army, not about a lost map, nor about a lost document. This story is the story of a lost fortune, a treasure whose exact location is still unknown today, claimed to have been found but never officially acknowledged, and perhaps a treasure that shaped the unseen balances of the world after the war. The story of Yamashita's lost gold. The systematic plunder of Asia. By the late 1930s, the Japanese Empire was not merely a military power. It was an empire fed by ideology, grown through economics, and advancing with discipline. Japanese expansion was different from the colonial wars in Europe. The goal was not merely to gain territory, but to seize Asia's economic lifelines. When Japanese forces entered China in 1937 and captured cities, they did not initially turn to military targets. First, banks were closed, then central vaults were emptied, temples were sealed. Royal collections were confiscated under the pretext of protection. This process was not a spontaneous looting. Everything was carried out in a planned manner, and everything was recorded. Every seized gold bar, every jewel, every silver object was numbered, weighed, and entered into centralized records. These records were not kept by ordinary soldiers, but by a special unit, directly connected to the Imperial Treasury Office. The Japanese command had accepted an early reality. This war would last a long time, and the possibility of not winning it was increasing with each passing day. For this reason, the operations carried out in Asia were designed not only with the present in mind, but also with post-war Japan in consideration. If Japan were defeated, the country could collapse economically. Against this, they had only one safeguard: a fortune that would be collected and hidden during the war. This fortune would become a shadow treasury that would allow Japan to rise again after the war. At this point, one of the most disciplined and ruthless generals of the Japanese army stepped onto the stage: General Tomoyuki Yamashita. Yamashita was known not only for his military achievements, but for carrying out orders without question. The task given to him was clear: to organize the plunder in Asia, to gather the treasures under a centralized system and to secure control of this fortune on behalf of the Japanese Empire. This mission was far more important than a victory won on the battlefield, because it was a plan for a future without war. As the units under Yamashita's control advanced, gold ceased to be merely spoils of war. Gold turned into a strategy, an insurance policy, even a silent weapon. And this weapon was about to embark on a journey far darker than anyone could yet imagine. The fortune transferred to the Philippines. The final vault. By 1943, the direction of World War II had begun to become clear. The Japanese Empire still controlled a vast geography, but superiority was gradually shifting. The American Navy had gained strength in the Pacific. Air raids had increased. Sea routes had now turned into deadly traps for Japanese convoys. This situation brought a vital problem for the Japanese command. The treasures collected from across Asia could no longer be transported to Japan. Every gold-laden ship, every chest filled with jewels, carried the risk of sinking in the Pacific, and this risk was unacceptable. At this point, the Philippines ceased to be an ordinary occupied territory for Japan. The Philippines turned into a strategic vault. Its geography was perfectly suited for this. It was mountainous, covered with dense forests, highly suitable for constructing underground structures. And most importantly, it was believed that it would remain under Japan's control until the end of the war. For this reason, a large portion of the spoils collected from China, Southeast Asia, and other occupied regions was directed to the Philippines. Gold bars, silver, diamonds, ancient statues, and priceless artifacts. All were transported piece by piece through secret shipments to Manila and the surrounding mountainous regions. However, this transportation was not a simple logistical operation. Each shipment was recorded under separate codes, handed over to different supervisors, and distributed to different locations. The goal was not to create a large accumulation in a single area, because a single mistake could lead to the seizure of the entire fortune. For this reason, Yamashita decided to hide the fortune by dividing it. This decision was also a harbinger of what was to come. Yamashita's greatest fear was this: if the war was lost and the Philippines fell as well, these gold reserves would fall into enemy hands. And this would mean not just an economic loss for Japan, but the complete destruction of its future. For this reason, the Philippines was planned not as a transit point, but as the final destination. The gold would be hidden in a way that it would never return. It was precisely at this point that the darkest phase of the decision came into play. The gold would not merely be hidden. Along with them, everyone who knew this secret would also be eliminated. Hundreds of secret underground complexes began to be constructed across the Philippines. These structures were not like ordinary caves. Multi-layered tunnel systems, special chambers reinforced with thick concrete, deliberately narrowed passages, entrances trapped with explosives. Some complexes were so deep that daylight was not seen inside for weeks. Local Filipino workers and prisoners of war were used in the construction of these tunnels. Most did not know what they were carrying. Those who did quickly learned that they should not ask too many questions, because this operation was far more than a military project. It was a secret buried for the future, and that secret was about to be sealed. The people buried along with the gold. Yamashita's plan was not limited to hiding the gold. The real issue was hiding the secret. Because the Japanese command knew one thing very well: no matter how deeply a treasure is buried, it cannot truly be considered secret as long as the people who know about it remain alive. For this reason, the underground complexes built in the Philippines were designed not only as vaults, but also as silent graves. Thousands of people were forced to work to transport the gold and construct the tunnels. Most of them were local Filipino civilians. Some of them were enemy soldiers captured during Japan's advance in Asia. These people were forced to work for weeks, sometimes months, without seeing daylight. Malnutrition, disease, and work accidents had become commonplace. But the most terrifying thing was this: no one expected to leave this place alive, because when the work was finished, nothing would be the same. According to witness accounts, after the gold was placed in some shelters, soldiers entered inside. The doors were closed, the passages were sealed. Then explosives were detonated. Some tunnels were collapsed, others were completely sealed. In some cases, concrete was poured, with the people still inside. The purpose was clear enough: an irreversible concealment. Limited excavations carried out in the post-war years revealed that these claims were not fictional. In some areas, skeletal remains, chained bones, rusted tools, sealed and unopened tunnel entrances were identified. Many of these findings were never explained to the public in detail. Some reports were kept classified for security reasons. Some excavations were suddenly halted, and some areas were permanently closed. At this point, Yamashita's gold ceased to be a simple treasure legend and turned into an ethical and humanitarian nightmare, because this fortune carried not only history, but human lives upon it. And this pointed to a disturbing reality for many countries even in the post-war period. If this gold were to be found, not only a material fortune, but also a chain of war crimes would come to light. Yamashita himself was aware of this reality. In all interrogations conducted after his capture, he used indirect statements regarding the existence of the gold. But he never indicated a specific location. He shared no maps. He provided no coordinates, because he knew that if the location of the gold were revealed, the dead would begin to speak, and this would put not only Japan, but everyone involved in the war in a difficult position. That is why Yamashita always remained silent. He was silent in court, silent as he walked to the execution platform. And perhaps this silence was the greatest order he ever gave. The gold that disappeared after the war. When World War II ended in 1945, the world entered a new era. The fronts fell silent. Weapons were laid down. However, behind the scenes, a much quieter and far more dangerous struggle began. This was the struggle for the post-war order. And this order would be built not only on ideologies, but on money. When Japan surrendered, the priority of the Allied forces in the Philippines was not solely military control. The region was also the center of a massive fortune known to have disappeared during the war: Yamashita's gold. According to official records, this gold had not been found. However, certain developments on the ground contradicted this explanation. Some areas were quickly placed under military control. Some excavations were closed to civilian observers, and some reports were never made public. At this point, new actors entered the story. American intelligence. The authority of some American officers serving in the Philippines after the war went far beyond ordinary military operations. One of them stood out in particular: Edward Lansdale. Lansdale had been appointed as an official intelligence officer. However, his activities were far outside classical military duty definitions. He was establishing secret contacts with local leaders. He carried out quiet excavations in certain areas. And according to statements given by some witnesses, specific bunkers were opened under American control. According to claims, the gold removed from these bunkers was not handed over to the Philippine state, nor was it entered into American records. So what happened then? This question transforms the issue of Yamashita's gold from a treasure story into a global power game. According to some researchers, this gold was used as secret funds during the early years of the Cold War. Operations carried out against communist movements, regime changes, covert political interventions. The financing of such activities was conducted with a level of secrecy that could not be explained by official budgets. And at this point, unrecorded gold was an ideal solution. These claims were never officially acknowledged, but what was striking was this: they were never definitively denied either. In American archives, most of the documents related to this issue were either missing or still classified. The declassification period of some documents was extended repeatedly. Some files were completely closed, and to this dark picture the internal politics of the Philippines were added. Years later, Ferdinand Marcos came to power and accumulated a fortune of a magnitude that could not be explained by his official salary. In searches conducted on some properties belonging to the Marcos family, secret tunnels, explosive mechanisms, and traces of gold bars were identified. However, these investigations were never concluded. Because the issue of Yamashita's gold threatens not only the past, but also the present. If the existence of this gold were truly acknowledged, the following questions would be inevitable. Who found it? How much did they take? In which operations was it used? And why was it hidden for so long? The answers to these questions could have shaken the foundations of the post-war world. So perhaps the safest path was this: to declare the gold lost, to close the file, and to bury the truth in the footnotes of history books. But some stories, no matter how deeply they are buried, never remain silent. What is buried is not only gold. Yamashita's lost gold can at first glance be told like a classic treasure story: buried gold, lost maps, dangerous excavations. However, as this story deepens, it turns into something very different. This is not only the story of a fortune whose location is unknown. It is the story of questions such as how it was hidden, who protected it, and why it is still not spoken about. The issue of Yamashita's gold did not end on the day the war ended. On the contrary, it truly began after the war was over, because this gold coincided with the formation of a new world. In the early years of the Cold War, as the world was divided once again, invisible wars were being fought. And in these wars there was something far more effective than official budgets: unregistered power. If Yamashita's gold was truly found, which many signs suggest, then this fortune did not simply remain in vaults. This gold may have financed covert operations, contributed to regime changes, and invisibly influenced global balances. And perhaps this is why no state fully pursued this matter. Because if the truth were acknowledged, some disturbing consequences would also emerge. Finding this gold would reveal not only Japan's war crimes, but also the silent agreements of post-war power holders. And this would mean a picture far darker than what is told in history books. Even today, Yamashita's gold is still being searched for in the Philippines. Some claim they truly found gold. Some disappear during excavations, and some fall silent after what they find. This silence may be the strongest evidence of this story. Perhaps Yamashita's gold has already changed hands, perhaps now in other vaults, in other countries, in the hands of other people. And perhaps the most disturbing possibility is this: this gold has already been spent, but the traces it left behind have still not been erased. That is why Yamashita's lost gold is not just a treasure legend. This story shows us how power is hidden, how history is selectively told, and why some truths are never revealed. Perhaps one day all of this gold will be found. Perhaps some files will be opened. Perhaps some names will be revealed. But for now, there is only one thing we know. Some fortunes are found. But they never belong to the public, and some secrets are buried not underground, but in the archives of states. But Yamashita's gold also reminds us of this. Wars sometimes hide not only gold, but reality itself. And in the next story we will see that what is being hidden is no longer wealth, but time itself.